Good morning. Oh, that's good coffee. You know, some books reveal their plots to you eagerly. They come right out and tell you what they're about. Page one, those scenes that are set right from the beginning, they come right out and they grab your attention. And some books choose to introduce their principal characters first, introducing the protagonist and antagonist, sometimes in scenes related directly to the plot, but sometimes they're tangential or, things that are related more closely to the themes of the book, right? But it's usually one of these two approaches. Get the plot going on page one, or get the main character going on page one. But some books are a little more experimental with their structure. And that leads me to Universal Harvester by John Darnielle. What is this book about, and who is this book about? Universal Harvester is not a very long book. I think it's 214 pages long. But this is one of those deceptively short books. Books like Franny and Zooey by J.D. Salinger, or The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon, or Visions of Gerard by Jack Kerouac. And the one thing that these books all have in common is that though their page counts are relatively small, it takes a long time to really absorb each one of these books. I'm kind of struggling to figure out how to exactly frame this discussion about Universal Harvester. First of all, this is a book that really appeals to me because it's set in a small town in Iowa, and that's where I grew up. I grew up in a small town with fewer than 3,000 people, and I graduated with fewer than 300 kids in my entire high school. And that was a community high school. That was all the kids in the surrounding area. A lot of the kids from the whole county came to our schools. So finding a book that has a setting that feels like a place where I grew up really appealed to me. And knowing that John Darnielle himself grew up in San Luis Obispo, California, which is just about as far away from rural Iowa as it gets, I think he really did a great job nailing that small town feel. There's a part of the book near the end where he talks about people moving around from town to town and how basically a favorite pastime of Iowans is to not so much gossip about everybody and where they've gone, but like to keep track of all of their relations and their friends and their acquaintances and where so-and-so is working now and everything. And it says here, in Iowa, we had a head start on this whole process because when we gather on the 4th of July or at Christmas, we find joy in tracing movements. The habit travels with us, whether we end up moving to Worthington or Owatonna or to the Black Hills in South Dakota. We maintain keen interest in what became of whom, whether we knew them well or not. Anyway, that passage goes on for 2 pages. 2 pages of the 214. That turns into like almost 1% of the book. That's not insignificant amount of time that he dedicates to discussing that small town feel and that sense of community in rural Iowa. But for me, it was just like a touchstone. It felt like he really nailed what it's like to be from a small town, and it's not just that passage. There's a lot of things in here that really feel real. What was I talking about? The plot? I think I was trying to tell you what the book was about. Okay, but here's the thing. I don't even really want to tell you what the book is about because a summary doesn't really matter. I could talk for half an hour about the plot, but it's not going to get to the point of what this book is really about. So I'm going to forego any descriptions of the actual plot, except to say one thing, that if you let it be, that this is a very suspenseful plot. Some very unsettling things come to light in this book, and the characters are left with the choice whether to investigate or to let it go. Their curiosity leads them to investigate, and that leads them into the rest of this book. Okay, but who are these characters? The characters that open the novel for the first third of the book don't turn out to be the main character. So who's the main character? Universal Harvester might be the first book I've ever read without a proper protagonist. I'm not saying this book isn't about anybody, and I'm not saying I can't point to main characters in this book, but what I'm saying is I don't think I can point to a proper protagonist. There is a character upon whose choices the rest of the plot absolutely hinges upon, but that person is not the protagonist, nor is that person the main character. There are people in that character's orbit who get more page time, but they get less time than other characters do who are further removed. So who's the mainest of the main characters? Well, there are a handful of candidates, but again, of all the main characters, none of them I would call the protagonist. And none of them is really a proper antagonist either. The one character who is the closest to being an antagonist is actually more of a victim. Can you properly call a victim an antagonist? So who is that person a victim of? That's a person we don't know anything about. So the real antagonist is somebody who has approximately 1 paragraph of page time. That's not a real antagonist. None of this bothers me. It just makes it difficult to discuss this book and to categorize it in typical fashion. So how do I sort my thoughts about a book with such an experimental style? It's difficult for me to organize my thoughts around this book. So I think the best way to discuss this book is to categorize my thoughts by the themes. The main theme that I can identify in this book is what we sacrifice when we attempt to recover the past. Now, the back of this book says, they become part of another story, one that unfolds years into the past and years into the future, part of an impossible search for something someone once lost that they would do anything to regain. And I'm going to spoil this a little tiny bit and say that it's not something that someone lost. It's someone that someone lost. One of these characters is trying to find another person. And even though it's not directly stated in the book, I think she realizes that it's a fruitless search. So she's trying to remember the past so that this person is not forgotten. But in her attempts to keep this person's memory alive, her own mental well-being clearly declines. So she sacrifices her own wellness because of this obsession with trying to recover the past, instead of just letting it go. Now this is contrasted with another character, Jeremy, who lost his mother a few years ago in a car accident. And when Jeremy's mother died, he was able to let her go. Death is pretty final, so Jeremy had an easier time of letting her go. Whereas this other character doesn't have that kind of closure. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss, where the loss feels open-ended. The person is gone from your life, but there's no death, there's no funeral, there's no social signifiers that mark the passing of that person from your life. So it's just open-ended. So the grief doesn't have a cap. And so this person in the book, who I would say is probably the mainest of the main characters, but has significantly less page time, has no outlet for her grief. So she creates an outlet. And this outpouring of her grief takes on a very strange form, and that's what the bulk of the plot of Universal Harvester concerns itself with. And anyway, this is a complicated book, and this review probably isn't the most cogent or well-organized review that I've ever done, but I really wanted to put it out there that this book, for people who enjoy a sense of existential dread, deep character development, and an experimental form, you'll love this book. This is absolutely for you. Now, Darnielle's writing is very subtle in Universal Harvester. It doesn't hit you over the head. It doesn't really hold your hand either. It feels very simplistic on the surface. But before you know it, you are absolutely swept away by the poetry of his prose. All right. I've read 2 of the 3 John Darnielle novels that are available, and he is a master of language and a master of characters. And these books are really not to be missed if you are also a fan of those things. I'm looking forward to reading his third book, Devil House, sometime later this year. So if you want to catch that review, make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you like this video, let me know by hitting that like button. And so yeah, that's all I got. Thanks very much, and I will see you in the next one. This is great coffee.